Hi guys, this is the ASMRnerd, and for today's video I'm going to be giving you a tour of my gaming PC. I get a lot of questions about my hardware, and this has been a video that has been often requested. And so I'm very excited to finally be doing it. PC hardware is something that I'm quite enthusiastic about and have been for a long time. But this is going to be a beginner's video for people who might not know much about what goes on inside a PC. I have a lot of people who watch my videos who have played on consoles their whole life, and there are a lot of PC gamers out there who, game on a PC but don't really know what's going on under the hood. Have never got their hands dirty tinkering with the interior, with the hardware. And so this video is going to address those kinds of people. And I'm going to just give a little tour and talk about each component, each major component on the interior here, and talk a bit about what the significance of each part is, what they do. And I'll be, showing off my specific hardware as I do so. I hope it's interesting. I hope it's relaxing. So let's get started. Okay, so we're going to start by talking about the processor, which is also called the CPU, which stands for Central Processing Unit. And if the computer were a person, the processor would be like the brain. It's where a lot of the calculations happen. It's where a lot of the processing happens, where programs run, and it's responsible for telling a lot of the other parts of the computer what's happening or what to do. Now, you can't actually see the processor on this computer, or any computer really, because it's buried underneath this mountain of aluminum and copper, which is a heatsink. And that's here to keep the processor running cool and efficiently. Processors generate a lot of heat as they operate. But the processor itself lives way down under there in a little square socket on the motherboard, and we'll get to the motherboard shortly. But it's about 1.5 inches square, and you just plop it into the socket, and you put down a little bracket over top of it to hold it in place. And then you install the heatsink on top of it. My processor is an Intel Core i7-4770K, which is a lot of numbers. It's not really super important, but it was one of the higher end processors about 2 years ago. In fact, most of the hardware in this computer was sort of high-end enthusiast hardware about 2 years ago, because that's when I upgraded this PC last. So, at any rate, the processor sits down in its little socket on the motherboard, and it does the processing, the calculations, runs the programs, and it directs other parts of the PC. This heatsink, as I mentioned, sits on top, And the base of this heatsink is just a slab of polished copper that makes direct contact with the lid on the top of the square processor. And then as the processor operates, it generates heat. That heat is carried up through heat pipes, which terminate in these little nubbins. Those pipes run up through this stack of aluminum fins, and as the heat moves up those heat pipes and into the fins, it's dissipated by a pair of fans which are blowing that way out the back of the PC. This heatsink is really big compared to most. It's a Noctua NHD14. The current equivalent model is the D15. And it's got a 120mm fan and a 140mm fan. And as I mentioned, they bring cool air in from the front, and they carry it through these stacks of fins and exhaust it out the back. The stock cooler that comes with Intel processors is a fair bit smaller and of a somewhat different design. So you might be used to seeing something different than this massive block over the CPU. But I got this one because it is very effective at cooling, and it allows me to overclock my processor. And overclocking simply means telling your processor to run faster than it was initially intended to. Not all processors are created equal, and each individual chip has a little bit of wiggle room, a little bit of headroom, and so you can typically push them a bit further than they come stock. So you increase the clock rate, the frequency at which the processor runs, and it can perform more calculations per second, and that allows you to run your software faster. Things take less time to load, games run at higher frame rates, all that good stuff. So my i7-4770K in there is overclocked by a bit, and that is facilitated by this heatsink, because as you overclock further and further, the processor generates more and more heat, and it takes a more powerful cooler to keep it at a safe temperature. This is also a very quiet cooler, and that's a theme that you'll notice throughout my PC, is that I have built this PC for nearly silent running. You can certainly hear it when it really ramps up, but I've tried to keep it nice and quiet, and that's partially because I do the videos that I do, and I don't want a big loud PC sounding like a jet engine taking off in the background. So I think that's all I'm going to say about the CPU and its heatsink for the time being. Let's move on to the next component. So the next component that we're going to briefly look at is buried way back in here. This is the RAM, which stands for Random Access Memory. And in my configuration, it's buried underneath my heatsink, so it's very difficult to see, and I wasn't about to go yanking out my heatsink to show it. That would be a lot of work. But it sits back here in slots, so they're just sticks with little chips on them, and they just slot in back here. And if the CPU is like the brain, then the RAM is like the short-term memory of the PC. It's where all the active data that's being used by the CPU at the moment, or at the time, is kept. So the CPU does the number crunching, the RAM holds the data that's being worked on. On this motherboard, there are 4 slots for RAM. I have 2 of them filled. I've got 16 gigabytes of G.Skill Trident X DDR3 memory in there. So that's 2 sticks of 8 gigabytes each. And that's plenty enough for modern gaming. You can even get away with 8 gigabytes these days still. Although that might be, in the coming years, start to be a little bit on the low side. But 16 gigabytes is certainly a perfectly comfortable amount of RAM. And I've also got my memory overclocked a little bit, so it runs a bit faster than it is typically clocked at. So CPU is the brain, RAM is the short-term memory. Let's move on to the next part. Next we have the hard drives, here and here. If the RAM is the short-term memory of the PC, then the hard drives are the long-term memory. I have 2 drives here on the top. I've got a 256 gigabyte solid state drive, which uses flash memory, which essentially means there's no moving parts in here, and it's very fast. It's kind of like a big SD card, really, with fast access times. And so I like to boot my PC off of here, so I've got Windows installed on there, and I've got a few of the games that I play regularly that take a little while to load. So for instance, my modded Skyrim lives on that drive. Then down below, I've got a big old mechanical hard drive, a 3 terabyte Toshiba drive. Now, in an ideal world, I would store all of my stuff on a solid state drive because they're a lot faster. But they're also much more expensive per unit space. So, a 3 terabyte mechanical drive costs, it was about $100 or something like that. And that's a fair bit of space. I have all of my other games on here, as well as all my, videos and things. In fact, this very video will be edited on this drive. So that's a lot of space. If I wanted 3 terabytes of solid state storage, that would probably cost me upwards of $1,000 easily. So it's a lot faster, but it's also a lot more expensive. So that's the trade-off. And this particular case, which I'm using, which I haven't really talked about yet, but we'll get there. But this particular case has a neat little feature where you can mount these drives on these little drive sleds, and they come in and out very easily. So you can just pop them in and out, and that allows for easy access. And as a matter of fact, this whole drive cage, this black thing here that holds these drive sleds, is modular, and so I could take it right out. I could move it up here if I wanted. I could move it over here if I wanted. It's very flexible, which is one of the reasons I like this case. So, and like I said, I'll talk about the case more shortly. So we've talked about the CPU, or the processor, which is like the thinking brain of the PC. We've looked at the RAM, or also called the memory sometimes, which is like the short-term working memory of the PC. And now we've talked about the long-term memory. So I didn't really make it explicit, but when you turn off your computer, when it loses power, the RAM is emptied. It loses anything that was in there. These drives, of course, do not. They hold on to things when the power is turned off. So if you didn't have hard drives, it would be like you'd forget everything you ever knew every time you go to sleep, or something like that. You wake up in the morning, you don't remember anything. You're starting fresh. If anyone's seen the movie Memento, it's maybe a little bit like that. Anyhow, hard drives. Let's move on. The next stop on our tour is the graphics card, which is also called the GPU, which means the graphics processing unit. And the GPU slots into the motherboard in one of these PCI Express expansion slots. And it just slots in there, and it is responsible for the graphics that the system outputs. And obviously, if you are an avid gamer and you want to play games with good graphics, the GPU is going to be a very important part of your system. This GPU here is an Asus STRIX GTX or GeForce GTX 980, which again is a whole lot of words and branding and whatever, but it was more or less top of the line again about 2 years ago now, but it's still pretty fast, and I'm still pretty happy with it. We're looking at it from the bottom right now, and I'm doing that so that you can see it's got a pair of fans, and much like the CPU that we looked at earlier, these fans blow air through a bunch of fins which have a heat pipe that carries heat away from the GPU itself. As a matter of fact, the graphics card is essentially a little computer in and of itself. It's got its own circuit board, which you can't really see very well, but it's on the top here. And it's got its own little processing unit, or sizable processing unit really, which is equivalent to the CPU of the computer. It's got its own RAM, so its own short-term memory. It's got its own heatsink that cools the whole assembly. So the graphics card is one of the more complex pieces of hardware in the system, and it's sort of like plugging a little daughter computer into your bigger PC. So as I said, when you're a gamer and you're looking for high frame rates and good graphics, definitely important to invest a large chunk of your budget into your graphics card. So while we're here, we might as well talk a little bit about the motherboard as well. So you can see part of the motherboard back here, and I was pointing to these PCI Express slots. To continue our analogy, the graphics card is sort of like the muscle of your system. It's what provides the brawn, the raw power for rendering these complex scenes in games. And the motherboard is like the spine. it connects all the other parts together, and it provides sockets and slots and things for everything else to plug into, and then it carries the information from the CPU to the graphics card and to the RAM and to the hard drives and all that. It's also on the back of the PC where the peripherals plug in. So it's sort of like the spine in that it connects the rest of the PC together, and it provides those central nerve bundles that carry things out to the other components or the other body parts. Mine is ASRock Z87 Extreme 4, which has served me well, actually. It's been a really good motherboard. Next up, we've got the power supply. And the power supply is like the heart of the computer. In the same way the heart supplies blood to the body by veins or arteries and veins, the power supply provides power to the PC through these power cables here that you see snaking out throughout the PC. These ones here are going up to the graphics card. You might have noticed a big one earlier plugging into the motherboard near the RAM. But the power supply does exactly what you think it does, exactly what the name suggests. It supplies clean, steady power to the rest of the PC. And when you're choosing a power supply to use in a build, it's very important that you consider the power requirements of all the parts together and get a power supply with appropriate wattage. And the power supply is something that people often like to cheap out on. They'll buy inexpensive power supplies because the wattages look right and the price was cheaper, so why not? But a power supply touches all the other parts of your computer, and if something were to go wrong with it, it has the potential to fry all the other parts of your computer. And just in general, having a high quality power supply that provides clean, steady power to your other components will increase the lifespan of your other components. And so, in my opinion, it's well worth investing in a nice, solid power supply. So this power supply here is the EVGA Supernova 750 G2. So it's a 750 watt power supply, which is plenty for what I've got here. But I wanted some headroom. Again, I wanted to have a bit of extra power to be able to overclock, because overclocking significantly increases power draw. You see this little 80 plus gold symbol here. That's referring to the efficiency of the power supply. So different power supplies are more or less efficient, and you generally pay more money for more efficient power supplies. But what it means is, to achieve this 750 watt output, it has to pull less power from the wall, essentially. And less of that power is lost as heat, because there's always some losses to as heat. And so the power supply actually has a big fan in the bottom of it, and it draws in through the bottom of the case, which has these perforations in it, as you can see, and then it exhausts out the back. So that is the basics of the power supply. You might have noticed, well, maybe not, I don't know if you can see, but these connectors here are what are called modular. So we could remove these connectors from the power supply or add different ones as required. It essentially allows you to cut down on the amount of cable clutter in your case, because having a rat's nest of cables in your case obstructs airflow, which means heat builds up, which means components don't perform as well or potentially overheat. So a modular power supply like this allows you to use only the connectors you need, plug them into the power supply, and you can remove any connectors that you don't need. The final thing we're going to look at today is the case. And my case is a Fractal design Define R5. And it's designed to be very quiet. It's got this door that opens up on the front, and you can see it's got this cloth acoustic dampening material on the inside. I've got a dust filter in the front here. It's removable. Comes right out for easy cleaning. Behind the dust filter is a pair of fans, GP14 fans from Fractal Design. They bring air in the front and deliver it to the components on the interior, like the CPU, GPU. The power supply draws from the bottom. The bottom also has a filter, which is removed from the front. Slides out relatively easily. Big long filter, and that prevents dust from getting pulled in through the venting in the bottom of the case. I've got a single exhaust fan, another GP14 140mm fan from Fractal Design. And then in the top, there are removable panels, which I have left in place because it dampens the sound. But if one so chose, one could remove these panels. I could instead place more exhaust fans or even a radiator for a liquid cooling setup in the top. You could also mount a radiator for liquid cooling in the bottom or even in the front, where I have these intake fans right now. The back panel of the case similarly has acoustic dampening material to keep things nice and quiet, and where I put the side on here, it also has acoustic dampening material. So overall, the case has decent airflow in through the front. It's also got a 3-speed fan controller, a little switch right here in the top, so I can manually select the speed at which my fans are running to find the optimal balance between sound and performance. And I think this case strikes a really nice balance between being very, very quiet and still delivering adequate airflow to the components, and being quite roomy. There's a lot of space in here and behind the motherboard, for example, for routing cables and things like that. So, and I think that's where I'm going to leave today's tour of my gaming PC. I hope you enjoyed it. Maybe you learned a little bit, maybe you didn't. Maybe you already knew all this stuff. If that's the case, I hope you at least were relaxed as we looked through and I talked a bit about my components. I would really love to start doing more PC hardware related videos. Now that I've done this sort of overview, I'd like to, in future, maybe do product showcases with specific components like graphics cards or power supplies or who knows. That's in the future. we'll see if that happens, but as I said at the beginning of the video, I'm quite enthusiastic about PC hardware. This is something I really enjoy, and so I would like to do more videos with it. If you enjoyed this video, please do let me know down in the comments. I love to hear from you, and feel free to like it, share it, subscribe if you haven't, for more content like this and my other videos that I do. So thank you very much for joining me today, and I look very forward to having you back here next time. Bye for now.